Hello. So I just got done seeing the Francis Ford Coppola film Megalopolis, and I would like to talk about it. Now, this movie has been kind of like a white whale for Coppola for a really long time. I think he first came up with the concept during the filming of Apocalypse Now, I think in 1979. Actually, Lawrence Fishburne, who one of his first roles on film was in Apocalypse Now, remembers Coppola talking about it with him on the set of that film, which is kind of neat because now he's in the final product. But, for years, people thought this movie was just never going to happen. There were all kinds of false starts and stops. It was even, it would show up in books about, like the great unfilmed projects along with like Jodorowsky's Dune and all of this stuff. And now somehow because, Coppola's made all this money with, his winery and these other ventures, he was able to produce this film himself at a tremendous expense, put his own money behind it, and this big risk, this huge swing. And I'm not going to really worry about spoiling anything going into this movie. I'm just going to get everything that's inside of me like out. So if you're worried about things being spoiled for you, you can, come back after you watch the movie. Though I will say, I don't think this is the kind of movie that you can spoil necessarily. There aren't really like twists or turns. I mean, like, there are events, but they don't really add up to much. Uh, like, I'll give you an example, okay? And if you want to leave, leave now. But if you don't want to leave, let me give you an example. Okay, so this movie, from what I understand, having seen it, is about these two men, right? There's the mayor of the city, this is basically New York, and there's this cool architect, magical man with magical powers that are never explained and never really have any plot significance. And these two men have very different visions for the city. The mayor kind of wants to keep things the way they are, he's a little more conservative. And this architect man wants to build this progressive city of the future, this megalopolis, right? And so it's kind of about industry versus ecology. It's about, saving the earth versus murdering the earth for modern conveniences. I guess that's what it's about. But I didn't really figure out that's what Coppola was trying to say until like the last 5 seconds of the movie. And it wasn't like this cool reveal where it's just like, oh, everything fell into place. That's what it added up to. It was more of this exasperated moment of like, this is what you were trying to say the whole time. I mean, I agree. Like, I love the Earth. I think the Earth is great, but you could have put that message across in a bit more direct of a way. I think. Um, I don't know, and I think Coppola, was intending to make a very progressive movie. You could even say like a very liberal movie, like a movie about like don't be afraid of the future. You know, we need to make a change, right? One of those kind of movies. And I think to counterbalance that, because Coppola, I think, was worried that people would view this as a woke movie. Those are his words, just because it had this like ecological message to it. Um, and he's actually said that he hired, kind of controversial people who've been out of the public eye for a while, like Shia LaBeouf and John Voight and Dustin Hoffman, strictly because their presence would like indicate that this was not a woke film, which is really weird to me, but okay. So anyway, so the architect and the mayor, right? They're like vying for the love of the public, um, and the mayor's daughter ends up falling in love with the architect guy, and then there's this side story about this reporter named Wow Platinum who's having an affair with the architect guy who's named Caesar, and they all have like Roman names. It's like Caesar and Cicero and all that stuff. And so she ends up marrying this old guy, old super rich guy, played by John Voight. And then his son, who's the cousin of the architect guy, is played by Shia LaBeouf, and he's like trying to like seize power for himself. So that's kind of going on the side, and it really doesn't have much of an impact on anything, but it's there. So there are all these things that keep happening, right? Like early on, Shia LaBeouf, he tries to get Caesar in trouble by getting him arrested for having an affair with a teenager, right? And he shows this video of the two of them like together in bed. And then it turns out that she wasn't a teenager, she was in her 20s. And also, the video has been doctored, so it wasn't even him in the video. So, you know, even though at that point, he had done nothing morally wrong, they still have to absolve him that much further, being like he wasn't even there, which is interesting. And so that plot just gets, it comes up and it gets resolved in about 3 minutes, and it doesn't contribute to anything. There's also this side plot that's going on where people think that Caesar killed his wife and that he killed her to to harness this this material from her with which he's going to use to build this city of the future. It's this crazy material that like can make dresses that make you invisible and stuff, and it can do all kinds of crazy shit. I don't remember, but they never explain how him killing his wife, how he's gonna like get this material out of her. Like, what are they even talking about? I think they imply later on that it's like the fetus of the kid because she was like maybe pregnant and he didn't know when she died, and maybe that's where the material came from. But they never explain this, and they never. Not only do they not explain the logistics of it, they don't explain why anybody would think that. So it's very confusing. But anyway, it turns out later that the mayor guy had like hidden evidence, that Caesar, he knew that Caesar didn't kill his wife, and he's like, if you leave my daughter alone, I will release this evidence and exonerate you in the eyes of the public, but you got to break up with my daughter. So not only do we not see them break up, and Wikipedia says they don't even break up, but I'm pretty sure they do. They're like estranged from each other for a little bit. But then we don't see the impact of his exoneration. We don't see really why he needs to be exonerated, what kind of effect this has on his career. People are just kind of mumbling in the background, but it doesn't really impact him all that much. Unless they didn't break up and she's just like estranged from him and off on her own for no particular reason. But they really make it seem like he took the offer. And the fact that I just saw this movie like half an hour ago and I don't even like really understand the plot mechanics here, it's because they weren't conveyed properly. Like there's all this stuff in the movie where it's just like, I guess this is supposed to mean that, and that happened because of this, but none of it is like properly explained and laid out. Like there's this character who Dustin Hoffman plays, right? Who's like this fixer for the mayor, and he goes out and solves problems. And there's this scene, my favorite scene in the whole movie. It's 2 seconds long. It's okay. So Shia LaBeouf is like trying to seize power, and there are all of these like vague fascist images and stuff, like he's supposed to be some kind of fascist figure or something, but it's really half-assed. And like somebody carves a swastika into a tree stump or something. But anyway, they have this shot where it's just like, one of the people who's working for Shia LaBeouf comes up to him and he tells him, like, hey, now that Dustin Hoffman's gone, you can finally seize power. And then it cuts to for a second to this statue of Dustin Hoffman, and then it cuts to a flashback of Dustin Hoffman, like, and Dustin Hoffman like goes ah, and then there's an explosion, and it literally takes 2 seconds, and then Dustin Hoffman is dead. Except it happened so fast that I wasn't even sure it was Dustin Hoffman. I only know it was Dustin Hoffman because he doesn't show up for the rest of the movie. So if that wasn't Dustin Hoffman that got blown up, it's just a coincidence. But I think it was, and I don't understand the purpose of Dustin Hoffman's character in the movie. I don't understand why he was preventing Shia LaBeouf's character from seizing power. I don't understand why he had any impact on anything, but apparently his character was very important because once he gets killed by someone somehow, all of this stuff is able to, like fall into place. So, what else is there to go over with this plot? Okay, so near the end, you get this whole side plot with Aubrey Plaza and Shia LaBeouf, where they're trying to seize control from John Voight. And both Shia and Aubrey are good in the movie. I enjoyed their performances, but both of them are playing it like it's a comedy. And John Voight is also playing it like it's a comedy, and nobody else is playing it like it's a comedy. So it's like this crazy cerebral drama where there's just like 10-15 minutes of just a comedy, just like spliced into the middle of it, like a full-on goofy broad comedy between these three characters. And once again, what does this amount to? The same thing that Caesar getting framed amounted to, the same thing that the romance amounted to, the same thing that this deal between Caesar and Cicero amounted to. Nothing. It doesn't lead to anything. It just leads to there are events and they happen. And what do they contribute to? What is this building towards? I don't know. Right? So things are just happening. And while things are happening, there are moments where you're like, this is great. This is really singular, really unique. There are some images in it that are very striking. There are some really good performances in it. Like, I would say all of the performances are very good. Like I said, I found Aubrey Plaza and Shia LaBeouf and John Voight all very entertaining in their little side story. I think Adam Driver, he made a lot of like really kind of unconventional choices, and some of them really paid off for me. I thought there were moments where his performance was really fun and really interesting, and he says every line in the film like this for some reason. So you got that to look forward to. But I don't know. It's well shot. It's shot by the guy who shot The Master, so he knows how to shoot a movie. And there were some moments in it where I was just like, that's a really cool visual. Like, I'm a big fan of how that looks. But it becomes so fucking apparent that he just had a bunch of visuals in his head and built a story around them, whether they logically made sense or not. Like the very last shot of the movie, they're there with the baby of Caesar and what was her name? Julia Cicero. So Caesar and Julia's baby, and they're there with the mayor, who's Giancarlo Esposito, who's a dependably good actor. He's good in this. He's good in everything. So they're there with the baby in like the future city, and there was just this really ridiculous scene where they're on this like futuristic. It's like, oh, it's the future, but it's a moving walkway like in the fucking airport, except that it glows. And the mayor's wife is like, oh, get on board, come with me to the future. Right, and the mayor's like, I don't know, I'm kind of set in my ways. Should I get on the moving walkway with you and become a better man? And then he does, and everybody's happy, and there are fireworks, and they're there with the baby. And then for no reason, right? The mayor, he just takes this baby and just puts it on the ground. So once they're outside, he's just putting the baby down on like the sidewalk, and they're not looking at the baby. They're like looking up at each other and at the sky and smiling and hugging. And Coppola did this because he was like, "Oh, this will be a cool image with like, it's like a clear bottom on the set, so you're looking up at them and up at the baby. And now I'm gonna do this like zoom in on the baby, this like iris thing where it's like spotlighting the baby, and time is going to stop, the baby's going to keep moving, and it's going to be a metaphor. There were a lot of things in this movie that were metaphors and were very blatant and pandering, and I wasn't a big fan of that. But it's an interesting visual, but there's no, in the reality of the film, why are they just like dropping this baby on the ground and letting it hang out? Like you can't just do things because it looks cool visually, right? You have to, there has to be a point to it, there has to be a logic to it. And it just feels like it feels like he had just a bunch of ideas and he was just stringing them together, and they don't, it's just one idea after one idea after one idea, and it doesn't build into a plot. There's no plot. There's like an overall thing that's happening, which is these two guys, Cicero and Caesar, are competing over the fate of the city. Right, that's like the big thing that's going on, and also there's the romance in there, which complicates things. But that's like a situation. That's not like a plot. Things have to happen within that situation for it to be interesting. And just all of the characters are so thinly drawn. Like, none of them are all that compelling. Adam Driver is able to bring a dimension to his character just because he plays it in this kind of eccentric and interesting kind of way. And, like, Aubrey Plaza makes her character entertaining just through like sheer force of will. Like, she's just like charismatic and she makes it work, but she also clearly is like, this is insane, so I'm just going to be insane. And Shia LaBeouf is the same way, in it. He's just like, yeah, this is nuts, so I'm going to be nuts, and it's fine. It's like entertaining. It works. But I don't know. See, I'm even like losing my train of thought here, and that's the problem with this movie. I want to see it again and take notes because so much insane batshit stuff happens in it that I'm sure I'm forgetting tons of stuff. But just basically, in the simplest terms, it's just a bunch of cool images and cool ideas, and there's there is a bigger picture that exists in like Coppola's head. There is a statement he wants to make, but these pieces he's assembled to build up to this message, they don't fit together. He's like, it's like when you're building a puzzle and you just want it to work, so you're like shoving them together and shit, and it's just like that's not how you build a puzzle correctly. Even if you want those pieces to connect, if they don't naturally connect, the puzzle's not going to come out right. And I know that's a really obvious metaphor, but this film is like 95% really obvious metaphors, so you got to allow me that, and it's okay. So this movie is like 2.5 hours long, which is long, but it's not like crazy long. While I was sitting there, I was positive this was like a 3.5 hour, 4 hour movie. And I think that's because there's no narrative momentum. It's not really building to anything. Or if it is building to something, you don't know what it's building to. So usually in a movie, you kind of have an idea where you're going. It's just like, our end game is going to be this, and this is how we're going to get there. So you have some idea of like, okay, now the movie is reaching that climax, and now we have the falling action. Now the movie's wrapping up. This movie doesn't have a structure like that because nothing really adds up to anything. So basically, it feels like just purgatory. It just feels like while you're watching it, it's like this could potentially last forever. I might never leave this theater because it's just, and it's scary. I was scared. I was like, when is this going to end? Is this ever going to end? It was tough. It was tough. Um, I will say, if you're like a person who cares about movies, I think this is very much worth watching because it's a historically important movie. It's the kind of movie that we never thought it would be made. Coppola's been trying to make it for 50 years. He's one of the greatest filmmakers we have, or he used to be, but you can't take that away from him. He's done brilliant stuff, and I'm a huge fan of Coppola in the '70s and the '80s. '80s Coppola, I think, is underrated. He had some good movies in the '80s, but yeah, the '70s stuff is legendary. And you got to give him that. But the last movie I saw of his was Twixt in 2011, and Twixt was awful. And I think this is a little better because there are moments in this where I liked it. There are moments in this where I loved it, where I was just like, I love that visual. I love that line reading. I love the way that moment was built. There were even whole scenes where I was like, I really enjoy that scene. But it needs to add up to something. At the end of the day, I need to give a shit about these characters and what they're going through. And I just didn't. There wasn't a way in. Everything is in the right place. Like, for the most part, it looks great. The acting in it is really good. You have a legendary filmmaker behind it. You have all the pieces in place for this to be the kind of movie that wins like 7,000 Oscars. But Coppola, he just wasn't able to add up all of these pieces into a satisfying whole. It just doesn't come together. And I take no pleasure in saying that. I really wanted this to be good after all that build up, after all these years, and him putting so much on the line. But it's just not. And those are my rambly and hopefully not too mean, but maybe too mean thoughts on Megalopolis. Thank you.